my eye. Through the mist, my surprise shone light from distant northern skies. At that point, realized I don't know where it comes from, but I know it's okay. If this is all an illusion, then I'm willing to play.
Welcome to the Quantum Guide Show, interviews with awakened masters as they share their quantum work with you. The Quantum Guide Show is produced by Karen Holton, creator of the 9 Steps to Quantum Health Transformation, a free 9-step online course to give you the tips and resources you need to thrive. Karen lost and continues to keep off 178 pounds of surplus body weight as she made her dreams come true. Whether you are awakening to the ascension process or simply want a wiser, more efficient lifestyle, this program is for you. No strings attached. The Quantum Guide Show is brought to you in part by Zendome's Orgonite, Karen's unique brand of orgone generators, ethically sourced, handmade, and double charged for maximum effect. Find out how orgone generators work and what they can do for you. Don't be fooled by imitations. Check out Karen's current selection, only available from her website, KarenHoltonHealthCoach.com, and on Facebook, facebook.com/Quantum Health Transformation. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Quantum Guide Show. Today our special guest is Preston Dennett, and he's going to tell us about his latest books called UFOs at the DriveIn and OnBoard UFO Encounters. Preston began investigating UFOs and the paranormal in 1986 when he discovered that his family, friends, and co-workers were having dramatic, unexplained encounters. Since then, he has interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. He is a field investigator for the Mutual UFO Network, also known as MUFON, a ghost hunter, a paranormal researcher, and the author of 26 books and more than 100 articles on UFOs and the paranormal. Several of Preston's books have been Amazon UFO bestsellers. His articles have appeared in numerous magazines, including Fate, Atlantis Rising, MUFON UFO Journal, Nexus, Paranormal Magazine, UFO Magazine, Phenomena Magazine, Mysteries Magazine, Ufologist, and others. His writing has been translated into different languages, including German, French, Portuguese, Russian, and Icelandic. He has appeared on numerous radio and television programs, including Midnight in the Desert with Art Bell, Coast to Coast, and also the History Channel's Deep Sea UFOs and UFO Hunters. His research has been presented in the LA Times, the LA Daily News, the Dallas Morning News, and other newspapers. Preston has taught classes on various paranormal subjects and lectures across the United States. He currently resides in Southern California, and I encourage all of you to check out his website, www.prestondennett.weebly.com, and the links will be in the description box below. Welcome, Preston, to the Quantum Guide Show. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Doing good. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm surprisingly intact. So what can you tell us about how you got involved in UFO research, Preston?
Yeah, I still look back kind of in amazement. I never really was looking for this. I was pretty skeptical growing up and heard a report on the news in 1986. It's a story I've told many times. Yeah, I just didn't believe that this guy who on TV had actually seen a UFO, but he was a pilot, a commercial pilot for a Japanese airliner. And there was radar confirmation and there was other witnesses and it lasted like an hour. So I'm like, okay, I wonder if there's something to this. and decided to actually pull off my blinders and actually ask people what they saw, if they've seen anything, what they think of this pilot. And I have to tell you that this was one of the biggest shocks of my life. I'm still getting over it. At least 20% of the people within my, family, friends, and coworkers had really dramatic encounters. And, not just sightings, but missing time, being chased down the road, or it's chasing them, or face-to-face encounters with grays. So this hit home, literally. I didn't look at it as good news. I was pretty upset, because it wasn't taught in schools, and people weren't taking it seriously. And the more I looked into it, it was clear that it was real. There was a government cover-up. There were hoaxers. There was disinformation. And there was a lot of people who were dealing with this on a direct, face-to-face basis. So yeah, it was a real wake-up call, to put it mildly.
I'm sure. I think that another difficulty is it's enough for a person to have this type of experience, but then to not be able to tell anybody about it, or because of being stigmatized or ostracized. Or, in my family, nobody takes me seriously because they just think I'm a nutter, and because they're very enmeshed within the mainstream construct. So that makes it really, really difficult. And this is such a, I love your two books. I haven't actually read them yet, but I got to tell you, I love it. Especially the whole concept of UFOs at the drive-in theaters. Now, I was born in 1956, so I've had a lot of experience going to drive-in movie theaters. So I know what that whole culture and feeling is like. So what inspired you to write about UFOs at the drive-in theaters? Does this happen often?
Yeah, it turns out it does, but I had no idea, to be honest. And this one really shocked me. It's kind of why I wanted to write a book about it, because I've been in this field for decades, literally, and knew about a few cases where people had seen UFOs at drive-ins. I had investigated one myself, a lady at work, her name was Claudia, and she found out I was into UFOs, and she's like, oh, this happened to me. And she described this encounter which occurred in 1972 in Paramount, California, at the Paramount Drive-In. And she was there with her family. She's like just a little kid. Her sister's there, her parents. When suddenly people are running by the car, screaming, dropping their popcorn, dropping their drinks. Cars are screeching out. And she's like, what's going on? And her parents are entranced. And she looks out the window, and right to the right of the movie screen is a giant flying saucer, a classic silver disc with colored lights, silent and quite large, below the level of the screen itself, and it cleared out the theater. So I'm like, wow, this is an amazing case, and thought it was kind of unique. Well, if not unique, certainly rare. But I started to run into other cases, and I think it was like after the 10th case or something, I'm like, I was writing UFOs over Colorado. I remember the moment. And I'm like, oh, look, here's another UFO hovering right next to a drive-in. It's always right next to the screen, right above it on either side. And I'm like, wow. And then I ran into another, and then a third. I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, maybe I should look into this. And I dug deep. I went to NUFORC, National UFO Reporting Center, and MUFON, and NICAP. These are all UFO organizations, QFOs, APRO. And there's a big database out there these days. Research is amazing because there's a lot of information. And I got a real shock. I scanned all my UFO books, and I've got a couple of hundred. That's a conservative estimate. And there was one case involving a UFO at a drive-in. But in these databases, like the UFO News Clipping Service, and it was mostly newspapers, I started finding something very unusual. And it was a large number of these accounts, stretching back precisely from 1950 onwards, with several high quality cases per year, certainly in the early years when drive-ins were more popular. But honestly, I've got modern cases too. So what I found is this is definitely a thing. And these are not normal sightings. Here, let me just wrap this up real quick because this is really cool. Your average sighting is like, an object darting by at night, perhaps, right? This is not what's happening here. These things drop down in front of the, everybody, right next to the screen. So these are very low level sightings. Second, they last a long time. We're talking 5 minutes on the shorter end, but sometimes, 20 minutes, an hour, even longer.
Wow.
And third real difference is they put on a display. They don't just come down and show themselves. They start doing weird stuff. All kinds of, I mean, we can get into it. They, will release smaller craft or dart around or flashlights and things like this. And I think the most significant difference here that is really important is that these are sightings that are involving, on the average, 100 witnesses to 200.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing like that out there. Nothing in the literature. I looked at baseball games, sporting events, music venues. There's some, but I didn't find 100. So I'm like, okay, this is unique, and I don't think most people know about this.
That's really interesting. So what would a typical encounter look like? I know you've mentioned that some of them another craft will come out of them, or they'll buzz around, or what would be the sort of, is there a typical sort of scenario in this for this experience?
Yeah, typically what we see is your classic saucer dropping down out of the sky without warning, or sometimes meandering towards the theater, but making a beeline towards it. And in most cases, sort of parking within 50 feet of the screen itself, either on the right or the left side or at top. And I think when I started to realize what was happening was that they were putting on displays. The case that really clinched it for me was one from George Fawcett, a pretty well-known UFO researcher. This occurred in May 1963. The 50s was the pre-show. The 60s is when they started putting on the the premiere. And this was, May 1963 at the Wellington Circle Twin in Medford, Massachusetts. A bunch of people were there just watching the movie when suddenly two glowing discs showed up, and they kind of parked next to the parking lot, not in front of the screen on this occasion. Sometimes they'll just go right next to the theater. This is a drive-in theater. And suddenly two more discs came and actually came down below the first two, and the first two scooted up. And then two more came, and then two more after that. So now we've got 8 discs in 2 columns of 4 each. And they were there for, just a few minutes when suddenly, they weren't watching the movie anymore. Everyone's watching this. These discs started, okay, like, you want a show, watch this, and started putting on this sort of musical chairs type of rotational display, darting around and doing all this stuff. And not for, a few minutes. They did it for 45 minutes.
Wow.
So this is like, okay, I know what's happening here. They want to be seen. They clearly want to be seen. And so that's when I started, finding this pattern. That's sort of your typical case where they come down real low. And each case is a little unique, and some are more extensive than others. But all across the United States, into Canada, and a few outside of the country.
Do you think that is why they hover in or around drive-in movie theaters, because they want to be seen, or what do you think their purpose is?
I've looked into it. I've certainly raised a bunch of theories. Like, one thing that strikes me from the beginning is if you look at pictures of drive-in theaters from above, an aerial photo. It makes a very striking footprint. It's easily visible from very high up.
Mm-hmm.
And I bet at night, boy, with these giant glowing screens and that beam of light coming at it and all the cars, it's got to be extremely visible. And my guess is the ETs are curious
Mm-hmm.
because they're drawn towards installations. This we know, whether it's nuclear power station, nuclear missiles, dams, anything industrial really draws them in. And this sort of has that feature to it, I think. So it might initially be curiosity. I thought, well, are they watching the movie? I don't think so. There are a few cases where they hang out for the entire show. So maybe I didn't find any pattern type of movie.
Mm-hmm.
Because I looked at that. No, it's The Simpsons, it's James Bond, it's King Kong, Jurassic Park, Outlaw Josie Wales,
Vampire movies.
It's everything, Exorcist. So I'm like, okay, I don't think it's the movie. I think, well, another thing I thought, well, someone actually brought this up to me, is do they think of the audience as easy pickings, for abduction? Because they're, you got a captive audience.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so.
No. So you're saying, no, they're not there for abductions. They're there for mostly curiosity and possibly just to let us know they're here, considering what a tight lid there's been on this whole topic from our governments and world leaders.
Yeah. Because I don't have any cases of abductions. I mean, there are some cases that speak toward it a little bit. And I'll tell you a couple of good ones, but generally speaking, no. These are just what I would call close encounters of the first kind, simple sightings. There are some of the second kind where it affects the theater. And there could possibly be some of the third time because there's some amnesia problems in some of these cases. But yeah, I don't think it's for that. I think you're right. They're coming down to show themselves off. It's a little kind of like a howdy do, a hello.
Yeah.
Because they're not. It's pretty much limited to just that. Sometimes they do affect the screen. And here's one really crazy case, which it's one of the ultimate of this kind. This occurred at the Ascot Park Drive-In in Cuyahoga Falls. This was 1974 August. The main witness is Scott Santa. I got to correspond with him firsthand. So a really amazing story. He was at the theater with his friend, nighttime of course, and they're watching the movie and everything's normal until suddenly this giant triangular craft appears over the top of the screen, as if coming from behind it. And this darn thing is huge. This thing is covering the entire parking lot, maybe twice the actual size of the theater parking lot itself, and not high up, maybe 100 feet. He says he could less. He felt like he could hit it with a rock if he tried to throw it at it. And it comes over the screen, and just like a switch, boom, all the power goes out, the movie goes out, all the lights in the theater, the snack stand, everything. It's just pitch black. This object has no apparent lights on it. And they jump out of the car. Everyone's jumping out of their cars. Some are frozen. No real panic that he can tell, but everyone's like gasping. They can't believe it. And his ears pop. The air gets real heavy. It's completely silent. Kind of the Oz factor is what this is called. Just a weird sort of twist, or I don't know, change to the environment. And this thing just moves slowly over. If there's any sound, it's a deep thrum, and moving 5 miles an hour or so, and moves off over the theater. And as soon as it leaves the vicinity of the theater, the power to the theater, all the lights, everything, like a switch is flipped, goes back on. And the movie is playing, and everyone's looking kind of dazed, but just gets back into their car and continues watching the movie as if nothing ever happened.
Mm-hmm.
And the witness himself did the same thing. He remembers, he went back to the snack stand, he went to the bathroom, but forgot the UFO sighting. Everybody did. This turns up in about 5% of the cases.
What, amnesia?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They just don't remember. And it was very strange. It was 3 years later, 2 to 3 years later, he was in a bookstore and got the cue, a memory cue, sort of, that jarred his memory. You see this in a lot of abduction cases, really. So one might look at a bald mannequin, or see a clown face, or a light in the sky, and suddenly their abduction memories flood back in.
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of what happened to him. He was at a bookstore and saw the word UFO on a book cover, and boom, that's all it took.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to tell you, the lady I interviewed, Claudia, who saw the UFO with her family at the Paramount Drive-In, same thing. I'm like, Claudia, what happened at the end? She's like, I don't really remember. I'm like, what do you mean you don't remember? That had to be pretty exciting. She's like, yeah, it was. Did you drive away? How did the UFO leave? She's not sure.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, it's weird, and I don't know how to describe this, but we actually forgot about it and didn't think about it until, and here's the cue again, she's in the kitchen with her mom, and there's a guy on the radio, and he's calling in to report his UFO sighting. He's like, oh man, I was at the Paramount Drive-In, 1972, this thing drops down, it's right next to the theater, people are dropping their popcorn. And she's like, oh my God, that was us. We were there. She turns to her mom, like, Mom, we were there, weren't we? She's like, yeah. Her mom says, yeah, I do remember that.
Mm-hmm.
That was amazing. And Claudia's like, well, what happened? Why didn't we talk about it? And her mom could only shake her head. She's like, I have no idea. I never thought about it until now.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Wow.
is there missing time here? It could be. It could be.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to say, generally speaking, in most cases, don't have that feature. So we're looking at very dramatic displays of saying, we are real, and it's very important, that we are here.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of what I think we're looking at.
So I'm just curious. That's really interesting. I'm curious to know what different shapes and sizes and what different kinds of UFOs are obviously. You just talked about a triangle craft. You talked about a saucer shape. Can you go into some of the different kinds of shapes so folks get an idea of what these people are seeing?
Yeah, with the drive-in movie phenomena, there is a very interesting sort of pattern here, because really it was the 50s, 60s, and 70s where we had an enormous amount of activity. It tapered off largely in the 80s because drive-in theaters started dying out.
Mm-hmm.
It was very, very popular throughout those decades, 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Number one American pastime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, anyone of that era knows this because we all did it.
Mm-hmm.
But because of VCRs and other reasons, technology, it's became much less common.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're seeing from the 50s and 60s and 70s, this is largely saucer-shaped objects.
Mm-hmm.
There was, of course, the triangular-shaped object and occasional different shapes. Blobs of light certainly turns up, or just kind of lighted objects. But another category would certainly be cigars.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a great case, which I just love to mention because it's got some crazy features to it.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the earliest cases I could find. Not the earliest. I think it's, the third earliest case I could find. And it occurred on August 12th, 1965 at the Terrace Drive-In in Bakersfield, California. This is a fairly large drive-in for 650 cars. And the main witness is Lieutenant Jenkins, who goes there to see a movie, and there's a bunch of other people. And at some point during the movie, this object drops down out of the sky. It's a huge cigar-shaped object. There was some disagreement about the shape because it was not fully visible. What most people saw was the lights that were on this object, which were all along it. And this thing comes right above the screen, drops down like a rock, boom, stops above the screen and stays there for really just a brief moment, 10 to 20 seconds perhaps. Lights up, shows its portholes or windows or lights, and takes off like a bullet. And so what's really interesting about this case is so many people saw this, and here's Lieutenant Jenkins, a trained military witness. He calls the police, the local police. Sheriff Leroy Hatfield answers the phone and takes the report, hangs up the phone, and the phone rings again. It's another person at the theater. And after the fourth call, he's like, all right, hang up, I'm coming down there. And he goes down there and there's 100 people there. This movie's long over. They're all talking about what they saw. And he takes the testimony of about 30 people. She's like, that's it. Not taking anyone else's testimony, because there was a lot of other people who wanted to give their testimony. He's like, I got down what you saw. And he, was pretty much in agreement. This was a solid metallic object right above the theater, 50 to 100 feet long, and with orange lights and silent. And so the sheriff writes up a report and he forwards it to the Air Force. And the Air Force was extremely interested in this report. They marked it action and sent it, it went to Blue Book at Edwards Air Force Base and was routed up past Blue Book to the Air Technical Intelligence Command at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, which is where we handle all foreign technology and kind of UFO central. But it went beyond that. It was also sent to Ent Air Force Base in Colorado. That's where we track all incoming and outgoing aircraft. And get this, to the Director of Intelligence at Washington, D.C., highest level of government.
Wow.
Right? So you can't tell me they weren't, our government doesn't know what's going on. They knew from the very beginning. They knew from the beginning that drive-in theaters were being visited, because other cases at that time were sent straight up to the top of command, right to Wright-Patterson, commanding general at Wright-Patterson.
Yeah, so that's a pretty significant case for sure. Now, I'm just wondering, has any particular drive-in movie theater have more than one encounter, like on two separate occasions or more often? Is there one theater that maybe is a favorite to ET?
Yeah, it turns out there is. And it's funny because most cases, no, there's a really weird timing to all this. Like I said, it started in 1950, and then they started bouncing around the United States, just hitting one theater after another. And this sort of weird, sort of dong, 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 bounce, like whack-a-mole kind of, just hitting everywhere. Sort of like a book tour, I guess would be how you might describe it. Or, someone on concert going around the US and doing their show. Which is precisely what they were doing, putting on these displays at little theaters all across the United States. Some theaters were definitely targeted more than once. There was a theater up in Canada where these objects were appearing over the screen so often that the owners advertised and used it in their slogan, saying, if you want to see a UFO, come to the drive-in.
What city was that in? Do you remember?
Oh gosh, I can look it up. Yeah, I'll find it.
Don't worry about it. I was just curious because I live in Canada, and I went to a lot of drive-in movie theaters, but it was in the Vancouver, which is the West Coast area, and I just wondered. But I don't want to put you on the spot. You have a lot of data.
No, I got it. It's right here. Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island.
Oh, the other end. Okay. But they do get a lot of sightings out there, so I'm not surprised.
Yeah, and there was another theater in Arizona, the Yuma, Arizona theater.
I've been to Yuma, yeah.
They've had at least 3 that I know of. 3
incredible.
One couple in the early 1952 around there. Very dramatic. Metallic saucer just comes meandering by right next to the theater. La, 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 la. And was one shortly before that, and one in the 70s, or I think it was the 70s, could it be 80s? At any rate, same thing. That time it hung out there for a long time, and it was kind of in the distance and kept getting closer and closer and closer and closer until everyone's looking at it and they're getting out of their cars and I'm like, yep, that's a saucer. Had portholes all around it, kind of gold metallic, brassy sort of. Came right over the parking lot, right over everybody, and moved on.
Wow. You know, I got to tell you, it reminds me of a show that came out, I think in the 80s, called Explorers, where the kids get a hold of this alien technology and they take something out of the dump, like a tilt-a-whirl from the carnival, and they use it and they actually are able to go into space. And then they find the aliens. It turns out these are the teenage kids that have stolen dad's car, right? The same equivalent. And it just reminds me a lot about that. Now, this is a little bit of a side topic, but you know, a lot of people...
No, wait, let me go back to that for a second.
Okay, yeah.
Because that is so funny you say that.
That's what it reminded me of.
You're not the first. I know that movie. It was, and yeah, I remember that one. And other people have told me that too. Like maybe they're just teenagers on a joyride.
That's
and I have to laugh because I've talked to people who've had onboard experiences, and one guy's like, "These guys were teenagers. I'm telling you, these grays. They were darting around. They were having fun inside this UFO." And we have to remember, there's this weird penchant of UFOs to chase cars down the road. It happens a lot. And
yeah, I've seen evidence. I've seen quite a bit of evidence that ET, and I'm using the term very loosely here, has some of them, you know, you get these reports of them being so serious and medical oriented and all of that. My experience has been that some of them have terrific sense of humor. And so that's why I'm really interested in what you have to say. So it turns out that, yeah, some of these people, we're going to move on to your book about the onboard experiences. I just have one more question about the drive-in. Are there any drive-in theaters anymore? And if so, is there any recent cases or sightings at a drive-in, or are they all gone now?
There used to be thousands upon thousands, and now we're down to hundreds.
Yeah.
But yes, they are still there. Most states have drive-ins, you know, in the major city areas. And the fan base is loyal. So they've been able to hang on, and they're actually having a surging comeback because of, you know, current conditions where everyone likes to keep their distance. So I don't think they're going away anytime soon. And yeah, they still occur regularly. Every couple of years at least. I've got some modern cases, one in 2015 at the Tascosa drive-in. The whole family saw it. Main witness is Dee. She's a DJ, a radio DJ, so she went public with her sighting. Tried to photograph it on her cell phone, as most of the recent cases have, and no one's been successful so far, but that's a pretty recent case. 2017, Fish Creek, Wisconsin. An object comes flying by, stops over the theater, makes a right-hand turn. It was a brief sighting, but again, it's sort of that display in front of the theater itself. And I think there was another recent display in Australia, the Woomera area. Some like 6 cars had to be jump-started after this object showed up over the theater, because sometimes it does affect electrical systems. So yeah, definitely recent cases. And what's great about that is, you know, drive-in theaters kind of offer a show that the indoor theaters can never ever offer, which is, you know, possible UFO sighting. I'm telling you, I've got 100 cases, and I'm guessing there's 10 times that at least, because most people don't report this. They really don't.
So before we move on to your latest book, is there anything else you want to say just to wrap up the drive-in theater? Sorry. Say the name of the book, please. I'm sorry.
Yeah, UFOs at the drive-in.
Oh, there.
Just that, yeah, these are cases most people haven't heard before. And I don't think people realize what's going on here. And the last point I would like to make is, you may think of these as simple sightings. They're not. These are very dramatic sightings. So many are close encounters of the second kind. Some could, as we discussed, possibly be close encounters of the third kind. But if I'm going to be honest, you can actually categorize all of these as close encounters of the fifth kind, which is a human-initiated encounter.
Human-initiated, yeah.
Right? Because in effect, we're drawing them in using drive-in theaters. So it's a great method for CE5 research. Bring your camera, is what I'm saying.
Sure is. Now, Preston, can you just, for the viewers that aren't familiar with the different kinds of contact, can you just give us a brief overview of what's close encounters of the first kind, second kind?
Yeah, sure. This is a system invented by J. Allen Hynek, father of modern UFO research, part of Project Blue Book.
Mm-hmm.
And he was having trouble, trying to separate these cases when he realized that, okay, some of these are what we would call simple sightings that don't affect the environment. That's a close encounter of the first kind.
Mm-hmm.
A close encounter of the second kind is a sighting that has some effect on the environment. Perhaps, a landing trace. Perhaps it's affecting the clouds. Perhaps they feel heat. In some way has effect on the environment. Close encounter of the third kind would be direct contact. So that's like seeing humanoids are actually being taken on board. And it gets to get a little fuzzy here because some people say, oh, that's actually close encounters of the fourth kind. And then the close encounter of the fifth kind was something invented by researchers to sort of coin a new type of encounter, which is human initiated, which sort of raises up even more questions because a CE5 can actually be a CE 1, 2, 3, or 4.
Mm-hmm.
And what we reached here was a point where the classification system started to get a little muddled and not super useful.
Mm-hmm.
So what we've, people are now just kind of on their own, and we don't see that in super high use, I would say, in terms of defining what a UFO encounter is. Because I have to tell you, simple sightings can have telepathic contact.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? Is that a CE? Is that a CE3?
Yeah, I see what you mean. A lot of overlap.
Right. And definitely a close-up sighting for me raises a red flag. If you have one of these objects within a couple of 100 feet of you, it's probably contact on some level. And contact can take so many forms.
Mm-hmm.
People can have contact in their dreams. People can have just telepathic inspiration, and I don't know if they are even aware of it. They can be definitely contact telepathically in a number of ways, but like a simple sighting, that's one way.
Mm-hmm.
Another way is through electromagnetic instruments. I did a video on this. I wrote about this in one of my books. Phone call from an ET. And I know how that might sound to a skeptic, but I'm perfectly serious here. ETs are known to turn off car engines, fuzz up radios, TVs, power failures of all kinds. And there are a smattering of cases, a good 20 cases or more, where people have received phone calls ostensibly from a UFO.
Wow.
And sometimes hears voices. This happened to Betty Andreasen. This happened to Debbie Jordan, Bud Hopkins' star client. I've got a number of cases myself. Most major researchers have uncovered cases like these.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, that's another form of contact.
Mm-hmm. I think there's also an overlap with sort of a non-physical phenomenon too. Like myself, I've seen UFOs probably, just while I'm out and about my daily life, probably 5 or 6 times. And what I find interesting about that is I just happen to look up at that right time. So it kind of reminds me a little bit like when I look at the clock and it says 11:11 or 4:44, and that happens fairly often. It's almost like there's a relationship somehow with what we are observing. I know quantum physics says a lot about how the observer actually creates in the quantum field. maybe I'm getting a little bit carried away here, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, this is something I've heard a lot. People will be looking at a certain portion of the sky and boom, that's where it appears. So there's definitely, or they're drawn outside. This happened to me. Both of those happened to me. I was drawn outside by an overwhelming impulse, an irresistible impulse. And boom, this UFO shows up. Just this orange light, it starts darting around. And actually, yeah, spoke to me. It's like, it's us. I'm like, whoa. So I'm like, okay. So I do think in a weird way, the universe itself is kind of like a giant biofeedback machine. You sort of get what you put out, and there is an element to we create our own reality. We are all one, you know, that we are all creators. We're all part of this magical gift, which is the universe. And there's something really powerful to that. On the other hand, I feel like there is a truth, you know, there is an external environment, there's a consensus reality. People are seeing, you know, essentially the same thing, at least here, certainly in the physical world. We have that. So, yeah, I'm sure that the ETs are, I think that's what makes it so interesting, because we're seeing sort of we're blocked in this physical world, but we're waking up to all these other dimensions. And there's this whole interdimensional aspect to UFOs that's waking us up to our own interdimensional aspects to ourselves. Our ability to go out of body, our ability to see the future, and all these things are definitely related to all this.
Well said. Now I'm wondering if we could segue into the other book a bit here, and I'm curious to know what inspired you to write your latest book.
Yeah, OnBoard UFO Encounters. I'm so excited because, you know, I've written a bunch of books about various states, which was a real compulsion I had to do for some reason. I started with UFOs over California and moved to New York and covered the Midwest, you know, Colorado, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico. Because I felt like the UFO subject wasn't being treated seriously enough. And so these are kind of like history books, which are very just objectively documenting the activity in each state. And I think it worked, because now other people are doing other states. And I'm like, okay, we're getting some real activity here. And but it was, you know, I was stacking up cases of my own and that I'd been researching. And I'd found that a UFO case once opened is never really closed. And so I'd worked with experiencers for years and was putting together their case profiles. And I'm like, wow, you know, I've got some really good information here. And this is sort of my main complaint for a lot of UFO researchers, because there's so many excellent ones out there, but I'm like, put your stuff out, you know, put your stuff out. And I'm like, hey, you know, I got to do that too. And so I got 15 of my best cases that, you know, I hadn't already written about, that were unpublished, and put them together in this book and used the theme all onboard encounters, because I'm like, hey, you know what? I have enough here where every one of these people has been taken on board. So that's what this book is about. 15 cases, 10 involving men just by chance, 5 women, and all who have been taken on board at least once, but most more than once.
Can you tell our viewers a little bit about what ET looks like? And I'm sure there must be some diversity there. What type of beings are people seeing when they go on board?
Universally humanoid, which to me is fascinating. Fascinating, like Star Trek. And, you know, speaking of which, Star Trek, that's what the UFO field sounded like to me when I got involved in all this. I'm like, it's a little Star Trek-y for me. I'm not sure if this could possibly be real, but as you actually research it, they got it close to what's going on here. In terms of my own research, and I think this is borne out by the research of most other, you know, investigators, we do see humanoids of various types, and by far the most common is what we would call the grays, or some version of it. And I think we got to be careful here because grays was used as kind of a catch-all for quite a different number of, bald-headed, large-eyed ETs. But that's for sure, 50 to 60%, ranging in size from 3 feet to 5 feet, 6 feet. Some unemotional, some emotional, some robotic-like, some, not so nice, kind of condescending and not so much compassion. But most, I would say, lean towards the compassionate side or do have emotions and certainly are not intending to hurt people. No, that's not their agenda at all, but I'm getting off track here.
Oh, no, that's okay. It's all good.
Grays, praying mantis would be another major category. 9 feet tall, about usually 6 to 9 feet, 10, 12, 15 in a few outlier cases. So these are real tall guys, very intelligent, huge eyes, looking very much like a praying mantis, which is so weird and kind of interesting to me. Because, okay, I mean, if you had to pick all life on Earth, why not a giraffe or, a seal or,
Well, mantises don't have the best of reputations because don't they like bite people's heads off and things? So I'm just wondering. So that leads me to my next question is what happens to people once they find themselves on board? Sorry, I know that's kind of two questions.
Yeah. Well, so let me just say grays, praying mantis, human looking, and a catch-all of humanoids. All different types of humanoids, short ones, tall ones. But basically kind of human looking, but not.
That basic 5-pointed star type template.
Yeah, interestingly enough. And when someone's taken on board, you can, to a certain degree, predict what's going to happen once you kind of school yourself in UFO encounters. For example, being physically examined is, I'm going to say, the most common feature. People describe the interior of the UFOs in very familiar terms. Universally, almost without exception. I don't want to say, without exception, because someone will march out a case. But usually people will describe rooms that have no corners to them. They're rounded. And pretty much also the rule is indirect, mysterious lighting. Almost as if the walls are glowing, but not even that. The light is coming from somewhere, but they can't quite figure it out. Generally speaking, clean. We're looking at usually white colors, pastel blue, sometimes silver or gray, walls metallic. Generally like that. Don't have like giant purple UFOs on the inside, generally speaking. If you know what I mean, or artwork or anything weird,
So they're kind of utilitarian.
Yes, but very aesthetic. People describe benches that are rounded, short, 6 inches wide maybe. They describe control panels tilted with colored buttons, amber, green, blue, and oven-like dials. Very simple looking stuff. They describe the windows in a very similar way, which I don't think a lot of people, perhaps unfamiliar with the subject, would know about, in that the UFOs just suddenly appear. The wall turns transparent. There's no frame as we would think of it. And sometimes the entire craft turns transparent, particularly the closer. Actually, kind of like Travis Walton described. He sat in that chair and the walls disappeared. This is something I've heard many times. There's usually a central column. So that's kind of interesting. A sort of tall central column, sometimes with electrical energy associated with it in some way. Domes on top. Some people are taken up to an observation type dome. There's a control room, often described in very similar ways. So yeah, there's a fairly consistent pattern there of what people see, and also as to what they experience as well. In fact, and I tell you, this is why I'm so encouraged, because my main beef with the ETs, particularly the grays, is kidnapping people in the middle of the night when people are screaming, and it can be scary. And I came into this field like pretty upset. I'm like, oh my God, these are floating torture chambers. I'm pretty mad at you guys. And then I started to look at it objectively. I started to really examine these cases of what is happening to these people and how are they as a result of it.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found was these ETs do not understand emotions, or certainly initially did not. They are much better now. I have to tell you, there's definitely a change. There's a progress here. Because initially there's a lot of very scary encounters of abductions and kidnappings, which still does happen, but the ETs are much more aware of human emotions now and are studying them intensely. And if someone is experiencing pain during an examination, generally speaking, they will take efforts to reduce that pain or knock that person out. Or if they're experiencing intense fear, they always say, don't be afraid, we won't hurt you. And that's generally borne out. And if someone is, in a place where they're not in a complete panic, they aren't paralyzed, because often people do experience a paralysis. And so what we see is people who, are having extensive encounters start to improve and have more interactive, friendly encounters. And people who get anything more than, don't be afraid, we won't hurt you in a physical examination. This is why I'm so excited, because the news is good. These ETs are talking to us and they have very important, positive, and profound messages to share. And it's been that way from the 1950s onward. And I don't care if you're talking to Greys or to human looking from the contactee era all the way up to now, or praying mantis, or what have you. The message is the same. And the number one message is, we are warning you of nuclear proliferation. We are warning you about pollution. We're warning you those two things, and your warlike ways. Over and over again, this is the message given to people. And often it's a full-on display. They will show you the earthquake. They will show you a hurricane. They will show, landslides, mining disasters, all kinds of, nuclear bombs going off, the earth exploding. They will use, people feel like they're there witnessing this. And
do you feel is that part of the alien agenda, do you think, to warn us and to help us? Or is there another purpose, or is there, right, do they even have an agenda? What do you think about that?
Yeah, this is one of their agendas, to warn us. And this could be, because some of these have come true. I know people who've had these prophecies and they've come true. 9/11 is a good example. I know two contactees who had very clear messages of this. And the hurricanes that we've been getting since Katrina, one lady, was taken after Katrina, and they said, that's nothing. There's going to be very bad hurricane seasons coming up, the kind you've never seen before. And we're certainly seeing that. On the other hand, there have been what I would call prophecies that haven't come true. And so there seems to be some element of scare tactics here. And by that, I mean, not like trying to deceive, but trying to say, listen, get off your butts and take action here, because you are on a pathway that will become irreversible. And that's specifically what they told Kevin Cannon, this Navy medic I interviewed. They showed him all these disasters. They said, there's a countdown clock. Because you've been setting off all these nuclear bombs, these disasters will happen, and you can't stop them. And he says, yeah, he's seen several of these. So their agenda there is to save our planet, to save us, to save perhaps, we are related to them in some way, whether you want to look at it as us as their pets or their experiment or their children kind of thing. We are important to them. They are fascinated by all things human, all things earth. They are here influencing us in a very profound way, but largely, I don't want to say undetected, but sort of, under the radar, I guess would be a best way of putting it.
Well, from some of the Project Blue Book videos, clips I have seen, I gotta say, our I don't know what you call them, military people have been really horrible, treated ET horribly, absolutely horribly. And in my experience, many of these off-world beings have never experienced reality like that because they're higher evolved, and in my opinion, a lot of them are working on the love harmonic. But I wanted to say, do you think also that what we do here on Earth may affect them, either a different timeline, same timeline, or even just you know how everything is connected? So, for instance, when we use nuclear weapons and things like that, we're tearing, in my opinion, apart. We're tearing apart the space-time continuum, which would affect everything and everybody. What's your position on this, Preston?
Yeah, I have heard that exact thing from firsthand, experiencers who have been told that by the ETs, that your actions are having devastating impact in places you don't know about.
Mm-hmm.
And the negativity that's being put out is causing all kinds of problems. I talked to one lady, she was shown this, like this dark band of negative thought forms that's surrounding and choking our planet.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think that there's an evil force perhaps on this planet that has been trying to work in the wrong direction, let's say.
Oh yeah, I would agree.
Because we have an enormous amount of negativity that we're dealing with here. This is sort of a school planet, a growing planet. But there's an inequality of wealth. There's a lot of poverty. There's a lot of unhappiness and disease and division and prejudice and things that I think are being purposefully fostered by somebody, or otherwise it wouldn't have been around for so long.
I would agree.
And that's all going away. That's what this is all about. That's why there's so much disruption now, because that pattern is no longer sustainable. And
it sure isn't. It sure isn't.
Right. So this is the main ET agenda. And it's not just warnings. They take you to the engine room and they said, you don't need to use fossil fuels. This is how we do it. Stop using fossil fuels. You're hurting your planet. And it's all about healing. One of their main agendas is healing humanity. For sure. These are people just like us. They are more like us than different. They are not alien any more than we are alien. There are some that look just like us. I mean, exactly the same. So these are people. That's something people really need to realize, that when you talk about aliens, well, they're people. No, so I've had some experiences, they would not use the term grays. They're like, oh, it's just the man, the guy, the person. Because to them it's the same. And probably that's what's actually happening. A number of people on Earth are what we would think of as hybrid ETs already. A lot of people claim this. And
well, if you look at our genetics, there is evidence. There is evidence that at least one of our genes or chromosomes, I'm not sure which is the right term, was two and became one, and then the redundancies were removed. Well, that doesn't happen just naturally over time. So I would agree with you 100%.
Yeah, all the missing links and weird jumps and the things we don't quite understand about how we've advanced. Combined with the stories we see in the Bible and other ancient writings, up to the modern day onboard UFO encounters, which have this same theme. And over again, it's about spirituality. There is a very strong spiritual element to this, which a lot of researchers have been reluctant to explore for some reason, but I think it's now everyone's coming around that realizing that this is all about consciousness, awareness, spirituality. And over again, what we see is people who have this experience, being even a simple sighting or an onboard encounter or any form of contact, receive sort of a gift of enlightenment to some degree. So we have people coming back from their encounters with a strong psychic ability of precognition, out-of-body travel, past life recall, hands-on healing, Reiki type healing, a very profound interest in saving our environment, and a very strong affinity to the animal and plant kingdom.
Yes, yes. So that's why I believe the universe does operate on a love harmonic, even though that's not presiding presently on Earth. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, so the people are here. The UFO people are here. They are their behavior is under the same umbrella as human behavior, but it's skewed much more towards the positive. They're not here to invade. They already have. They are us. We are them. And like you say, we are all one. And I think, honestly, this is an exciting time to be on this planet.
Sure
yeah,
is.
There's a lot of talk about, unrest and social collapse and widespread disaster and conspiracies that are very frightening.
But sometimes don't we need to tear down an old system before a new one can emerge? Or perhaps make it so obvious to everyone that people wake up and start to look, I guess, take responsibility, right? Because each one of us has responsibility while we're here.
Exactly. Yeah. People talk about who runs the world. Is it the power elite? Is it the 1%ers? Is it the Illuminati? Is it, the enlightened masters? Is it the ETs? I think there are gradations of, truly it's the people. It's the people is the most powerful force on earth.
Agree.
And I think what we're seeing is wonderful progress, really wonderful progress. People are really waking up to the fact that men and women are equal, that it doesn't matter what race, gender, or how you identify yourself. Each entity is sacred, and that is manifesting all around us. And in terms of the past, how far we've come the past couple of 100 years is amazing.
It is.
So I'm very hopeful. And I think,
wonderful.
Yeah, we might have some growing pains. And we might have some tough times with our environment. And the truth is, the universe is safe. If there was, large scale loss of life, that's not the worst news in the world. There's life after death. There's another side. The heavenly realms are beautiful. There are other planets. The human race is not going to go extinct. If there's trouble here on Earth, and a small segment survives, well, that's wonderful. Then we can build from there. I don't think we have to go through all of the catastrophes people are predicting. I really don't, because there's a lot of that going out right now. I think that what we're going to see is just a rough ride to moving towards sort of a unifying way of running our world. As far as I know, the ETs don't have money. They don't have big problems with crime. We don't know a lot about ET society, but I'm talking to some experiencers who do. And they're like, no, they don't. They're all telepathic. So wouldn't it be crazy if suddenly we rose up a vibration? We moved into the sort of the fifth dimension. This is something ET experiencers are talking about.
Yeah.
And suddenly there was universal telepathy. Now you can't lie. Go ahead, try it. That would change society.
Sure, it sure would. It sure would, Preston. Now, I'm sorry, but we're starting to run a little bit close to the end. I'd love to have you on again if you'd like to, because we've barely scratched the surface. This is a huge, huge subject, and I know people are really interested in it. And that's why I created the Quantum Guide Show, was so that people could come on, and once we've woken up and sort of cracked out of the construct, and we get past the shock and awe, then we get busy bringing our gifts and our talents to the rest of humankind. And so I just think you have so much wisdom and so many amazing things to tell us. I'd love to have you back. But before we leave, Preston, what is the best way for people to get a hold of you? And what are your closing remarks about your basically from arising from your books and from the work that you do?
Yeah, thanks very much. I do have a website. It's prestondennett.weebly.com. Or if you just Google my name, it should take you there. You can contact me through my website. I do have a new YouTube channel, which is growing by leaps and bounds. I'm super excited about it.
Oh, maybe you could shoot me the link and I can, or give it to me after we close the show. Stay on for a few minutes. Give that to me and I can make sure that gets into the description box.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm on Facebook and Twitter as well.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely, I feel like this is an important subject. Would be what I would, want people to have a takeaway. Would be that this is very serious. It does influence your life. There is a cover-up. It's crumbling. I think we are going to see opening towards disclosure. This will solve the energy crisis, the economic crisis, the environmental crisis. A lot of the answers to all our problems are here. As Quasga, Betty Andreessen's alien said, love is the answer to humankind.
Mm-hmm.
That's a direct quote from a gray alien. And I love it because I think that's the simple truth. And that's what I want everyone to move towards is let's do this. And
Mm-hmm.
And don't be afraid of UFOs. If everything hits the fan, it's very possible they may come and help us out. Seriously. So if one lands in front of you when things are going down, don't be afraid. I know of many cases of people who are no longer here on Earth. Some people have left and gone with them. This does happen.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a wonderfully, this is just an amazing time. And yeah, it's very exciting to see what will happen. I think we're pushing towards open official disclosure and open official contact. And that's why this is so important, because the world is going to change. Grab your seatbelt and hold on.
Yeah, buckle up, folks. Here we go. Well, thank you, Preston, so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure the folks or the viewers will be really, really happy to hear your message. And I encourage everyone to check out Preston's books. He's got so many to choose from. And I know you're just going to love what he has to say. So thank you again, Preston. And until the next time, I was going to say goodbye now.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the Quantum Guide Show. Become the change you wish to see in the world. Subscribe to Karen's YouTube channel, click the like button, and share this show with your friends. Check out Karen's website at KarenHoltonHealthCoach.com. All the links are available in the description box below. Until the next time, keep up the good work.
Endlessness puts all my inner strife to rest. For time gives birth to hurriedness. It all makes sense, well, more or less. And the sages put me to their test. With heart and soul, I do my best to find the answers to my quest. I wonder and I must confess, I don't know where it comes from, but I know it's okay. If this is all an illusion, then I'm willing to play. okay.